Our other speaker is Nimmi Rangaswamy, is a professor at the Kohli Center on Intelligence Systems, Indian Institute of Information Technology at Hyderabad. She brings an anthropological lens in understanding the impacts of AI research and praxis. She is also an adjunct professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad, where she teaches courses at the intersections of society and technology. Previously, her job at Microsoft Research was a combination of theoretical analysis and ethnographic field research to understand technology use in developing countries. These are studies of patterns of technology adoption in various social contexts and spaces in India, ranging from middle-class consumption of domestic media, the business models of cyber cafes, and the use of mobile, internet, and Facebook among urban slum youth. So may I now turn to Nimmi for your presentation?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks so much. First, let me thank Tejeshwini for inviting me to the symposium. I think I see a lot of overlap between Sue's research and mine. And as I'm going to speak, I think the connections will become quite evident. So I think this is a great space to be sharing one's own, one's own insights from a very different context. Okay, so let me begin to share my screen. Though I mean, I would simply love to not use a PPT at all, but then it's kind of become like your second skin, you know, especially during these conferences. Okay. So let me, you see my title, Digital Dilettante and the Creation of Romance. I can't see the, I'm unable to see the, so this is a very specific study. I'm an anthropologist and context is everything for me, right? But we get deeper into the context so that we are able to generalize and present certain universal truths, universal in quotes, but that is what one tries to achieve through a deeper study. So the context in my case, where the slum youth in India, we did research in 3 different cities, Hyderabad, Bombay, Chennai. These were the 3 metropolitan cities and the slums that were, in fact, embedded in these cities, which have their own very different social context. Slums in India are part and parcel of suburban India, right? They're right bang in the middle of flourishing, thriving societies. They are not somewhere on the edge of society, right? So that also has some implications. So that is going to be my context, as opposed to what Sue was saying. Sue's context was mainstream, urban, probably middle class young people, right? So it's interesting to see how there is an alignment, and also there is a contrast in how meaning is made out of these engagements with social media. Though I use the word, sorry, dilettante, it's more used ironically because however resource poor the subjects of my research are, the way they used media was very rich, very sophisticated, and they knew what they were doing with them. Okay, so I'll begin. Just a moment, I'm unable to change my slides. Just a moment. Oh God, yeah, here you go. So these are some of my inspirations. These are some of the people I borrowed from. And I've gained so much by trying to understand what they were saying about media itself. Some of them, most of them are recent work. Not many of them are older than 10 years, I think, because all this kind of literature and knowledge is coming up in the last decade. But the shifts in the way we understand media has changed. You know, as I was listening to Sue, I see how the whole instrumentalization of media has moved on, you know, say what I did 10 years ago, the kind of work I did 10 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see how I contrast what happened 10 years ago and what's happening today, especially from the lens of digital intimacy. So there are 2 things I want to talk about. One is digital intimacy as I saw them forged on Facebook. This was an earlier study I did with the slum youth in India. And the second is somewhat a more recent observations I made. This is not my original research, the second part of it. It's more observational kind of reflection on what is happening in micro celebrity media. You know, that is the in thing today, right? Influencers, micro celebrities, YouTube stars, broadcasting stars. So how is intimacy forged there? You know, I'll see if I have time, I'll go on to the second one. But I think I will focus more on the Facebook intimacy that has been my own research. So the words you see on the left side this is all special language, right? Deep like, streak, ghost. Some of y'all may be able to understand what these things mean. Deep like is a very interesting idea. No, what is the deep like? You know, does it mean intimacy? And what are the actions online that express a deep like, right? So these are all very specific lingua that develops like code between people who are using these medias to express intimacy itself, and that requires a lot of engagement, a lot of study, and requires a lot of interviewing and getting deeper into the practices on this media. So this is just I just put it out there because how you represent and express your intimacies also takes on new forms and new formats. So this is a little bit about, before I dwell into the Facebook thing, I just wanted to put out a few theories that are out there about what these forging intimacies mean on media itself. One is, this is looked at as a rite of passage. Rite of passage for what? For probably some kind of socialization, pre-socialization of adult roles. When you look at this famous Street Corner Society, the book by the sociologist White, the Street Corner Society was all about socialization. How do you enter into roles? What is expected of you? Things like that, right? But is media taking that sort of meaning making? Are young people on media also looking at media to socialize themselves? It could be about intimacy, it could be about romance, but is it also about becoming adult and getting into the adult world? You know, so there seems to be some connection between the industrializing society and the so-called post-society we live in, and the role media plays as transiting young people into adulthood. This is just something to think about. And probably they are doing this through intimacies, through forging intimacies. Let us see about that. And the other idea, which when I was reading Richard Link's articles, he studied Norwegian young people, and he kind of came into this, developed these insights, which suggested that media was not about emancipation. It was more about self-obsession, obsession with how you groom yourself, obsession with careers, obsession with socialization. So where is emancipation here? Is it emancipation, or is it obsession with representing yourself, right? Why that intrigued me was, I'm going to say something opposite, you know, because this is Norwegian, a very developed country, and youth from a developed context, right? So in India, especially when I'm studying the slum context, I see media as emancipatory in certain ways, you know. So that was an interesting contrast for me. And also peering as infrastructure, this whole notion of you know, peers, what kind of peers you meet online, how do you also, the process of peering itself becomes your pillars of maybe sounding, it acts probably as a reference point, as a sounding board, and as an infrastructure element that you're interacting with. So I'll talk a little bit more about peering as infrastructure as I delve into the Facebook study itself. So before that, this is another small idea about adult cohorts. You know, if you look at Friends, the TV program Friends, we look at Bridget Jones' Diary, these movies, they are very clearly, and earlier on before that, the youth movement, the hippie movement, or the movement, the anti-war, anti-Vietnam movement in the US, all these things are also some kind of peering, some kind of forging intimacies. But they are very different, right? The post-war, the hippie movement, they were all very political, as we know, and also very white, if I may say so. You know, they expressed a certain racial kind of representation also. And then when we move on to TV programs, when mass media came into being, like Friends or Bridget Jones and things like that, they are also a specific kind of forging an identity, right? Probably ideal, probably what is expected of young adult groups, right? They were kind of setting the norms, right? And these were all, again, not interactive media. They were sort of top-down media, and they romanticized a certain idea about young adult groups. But today, when you compare it, when you compare Friends and the culture that the Friends promoted, or Bridget Jones and things like that promoted, or even earlier, the anti-war movement or the hippie movement, today, when you see the young adult groups on media, it is very much bottom up. It is very much more participatory. It's very much more fragmented, and it's also more self-representational. You're putting out yourself out there, which is very different from this top-down idea from adult cohorts, which these kinds of programs were talking about. So these are some of the ideas I just wanted to put out before I go into my next part of the study. Okay, now coming to Facebook, I'm going to look at Facebook and the intimacies that were forged on Facebook from a global marginal perspective. A global marginal simply means, simply represents the slum youth I was studying, and what meaning did Facebook hold for them? The meaning making, you know, as anthropologists, that's what I do, right? I try to find what meaning does a technology have? Does a technology interface have to the people who are engaged on them? So what I found was quite intriguing, but what I was thrilled about is how I connected with what Sue was trying to say about pure love and idealized love. Okay, now heterosexual love on Facebook, you know, this simply meant, and also another problem with my study was most of my participants were young boys. You know, there was this is clearly a very gendered study, because I simply couldn't find teenaged women who were using Facebook at that age. You know, there were a lot more young women who went on to Facebook, went on to mobile internet once they had some control over once they gained economic independence and had some control over their own money. You know, so but the teen and the tween and the mid-teens, all these were about boys, right? But girls become protagonists, as you would see, because they became the center of the obsession for these boys. So Facebook, and I'm also not delving into the other versions of love, namely homosexual love or the other more fluid versions of love. This was more about heterosexual love and mainstream love. So why did these young people come onto Facebook? The first, of course, they were looking at, Facebook was a gateway to global cultures. It was a gateway to looking at what was happening around the world, looking at pictures from people who were living somewhere else, a person living in London or a person living in US, person living in the Far East, whatever it is. It was some kind of a gateway to look at all these profiles, which was simply unavailable in the context of their own living, right? So Facebook became this global gateway for them. And it was not, too difficult to figure out that, okay, Facebook is also a platform to begin to friend. It was a friending platform, right? That was also one of the ideas. I don't know. The beginnings of Facebook was a little more complex. It was more exclusive. When you look at the Harvard origins of Facebook, it was something else, but it had soon become this friending platform and reaching out to a variety of people who are not like you. That was what Facebook represented to these teenage boys in these slums. So the first thing that kind of struck these young developing kids, is I can now probably friend a woman who does not belong to the kind of society I belong to. So I can reach out to a woman who's more educated, who comes from a different social class, probably a different social group, probably more educated, and probably embedded in a social context very different from me. But by very different, I mean higher than me, right? So this was quite surprising to me. So they were looking at this platform, Facebook as a platform, as an entry point to friend those kind of people who they believed represented an aspirational community, right? So that, and this also took on some kind of a romantic, what do I say, a romantic aspiration, because it was all about girls, reaching out to girls, especially a certain kind of girls who were simply impossible to reach out to within their slum contexts, right? So, okay, so imagine this 15-year-old boy who has Facebook, because that was the time when a mobile revolution was happening in India 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, when internet was being sold. Like you could go and buy a candy from the shop, right? It was that cheap. You could buy internet for 10 rupees. 10 rupees is 1/10, 1/8 of a dollar, say, for example, and you could use the internet for the day. So Facebook was accessible. So they were living in a post access society where you could use internet for whatever means, and Facebook was this destination that everybody wanted to be on. So the minute they were on Facebook, it was about reaching out to women. So all kinds of profiles were searched for, and these boys would be spamming the girls as friend requests. So they would create, of course, some of their profiles were real. They would create multiple profiles of themselves, representing themselves in different ways. I'll show you some of the pictures. Here you go. You have a video gallery about them. So just look at these pictures. Some of them were DPs of their own pages. So this was the romantic love I'm talking about. Love had many dimensions, no? Idealism, machismo, empathy. I'll go more deeper into these three things. So just look at these pictures, right? This was how these young boys were representing themselves. Again, pictures like this. And again, pictures like this was one of the most sought after pictures. So all of them were about love. All of them were about a certain idealization of love, not very different from the pure love, the more urban and more middle class young people that Sue was talking about. But here it takes on a different meaning. So these were projections, of course, there were also internal projections about what these teenagers had, the image of love. And many of them were fueled by Bollywood, right? By the Bollywood idea of romance. Romance always existed as a subversion in Bollywood movies in India, where romance was seen as breaking out of your own constraints to seek this so-called pure love. So many of that were very visible in the pictures these young teenagers were choosing to attract girls to friend them, basically. So here, if you see, this seemed like empathy, love and empathy, and also idealized versions of love, right? So the message the boys were sending out when they wanted to friend women, when they were kind of hitting on them, I mean, digital hitting, right? You were spamming their pages, asking for friend requests, right? And which takes on, I mean, hitting is a little a harsh word to use, but that's what these boys were trying to do, right? So again, idealizations of love, projecting themselves as somebody as very empathetic, very sensitive, a very romantic personality. So many of these pictures revealed that. And another thing is, this was another very powerful idea that struck us when we were doing this research was, these boys were seeking romantic content on the internet, and they were recycling the same again and again and again. This romantic, all these pictures are from the internet. They were surfing the internet and getting these pictures from the internet itself, right? And content became so important because how could they communicate? It was through pictures. It was through these recycled content that they were able to express their intimacies, right? They didn't know English. They were unable to articulate themselves because English was the aspirational language. All the girls they were trying to seek out to were these so-called posh girls who were above their own social status, right? So pictures were the proxy to establish intimacy too. So the other side of expressing romantic love was cynical, sadomasochistic, and self-harm. So why this? Why were they going into this darker space while getting to be intimate, right? This is also also another very practical problems that Facebook also posed. So I'll show you some more pictures. So here you're looking at pictures that is expressing a more darker side of intimacy. There is blood, there is a broken heart. There is also about talking about falling in love, probably some kind of betrayal in love, some kind of love that is not being fulfilled. You know, this also comes from being not getting the friends they want to, right? Of course, I don't want to talk about how they made these friends. Some of these boys actually made friends with girls of a higher status. There was one boy who was chatting constantly with a girl in London. There were a couple of boys who actually met these girls in real life. But majority of them were getting turned down, right? I mean, who would friend these boys? Friending these boys was not a very easy proposition, right? It is more it remains at the more ideal level, you know. Many of these girls were not, when the girls who these guys were hitting on or spamming, did not accept their friending requests. So many of them were turning them down, right? So you see these kinds of expressions of love, you know, these kinds of expressions of broken love, broken hearts were being posted, right? These are pictures from the internet that were being recycled, you know. So there are more pictures. I'll show you more pictures like these. See, again, you know, some of them were talking about suicide. Some of them we're talking about being burnt in love. So from these idealizations of love, it kind of moved on to expressing the disappointments in not being able to forge that intimacy which they were hoping for. Now, if you see, if at one level, I think some more pictures for you. These are really pictures that are expressing, it's really going into a dark space, right? If you see that big picture on the left, it's about writing pouring expressions of love with the blood that's flowing through your vein, you know. In fact, there was when I present these when I presented this talk in the US once, they really looked at these and said, oh my God, the way they were using blood to express a certain kind of intimacy is really interesting. Now,
sorry, Nimmi. Sorry, Nimmi. 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Yes, I'll wind this up. So, what I'm trying to establish through this this kind of content, which these teenager boys were obsessed with, is one is where are they trying to transcend their own social locations, right? So the social locations these kids were trapped in was something very constraining, something. And also, if you look at the slums of India, how are you going to get yourself outside of it's just not the physical constraint, it's also the mental world they were living in. How are they going to explore the world living in the slum? It was not only about a material resource crunch, it was also about how do you give flight to your imagination. So is digital intimacy forged to transcend social locations? So this becomes a very political kind of an act. But I'm also cautious about using the word political, because this is not, I don't know how much of political consciousness these boys were holding when they were doing these things. Is it only about expressing a romantic love, expressing an aspiration to reach out and reach out to a certain kind of intimacy that was denied to them because of their social location, right? Or are they making political statements? But I wouldn't go very far as making this overly political, because the idea was more about intimacy. The idea is to establish this intimacy through an idea of romantic love. So the idealization remained at that level, though the statement was very political, because they were trying to transcend location, social context, and social class by doing this, right? A little more about the ethnographies I did. So what was interesting was about the study was, it also kind of, this whole digital space seems to have opportunities to transcend the location itself. Like, as I was saying, some of these boys actually went and met these girls, but the outcomes of these meetings were mixed. Some of them were disappointing. Some of them did not go beyond one meeting. And I don't think I would hazard a guess saying that this ended like a Bollywood film in a long-term relationship or something like that. Those hurdles were even more difficult to cross. But definitely this whole digital space gave hope, gave a channel, and also gave some kind of opportunity to forge an intimate space where certain things were being actualized. So I will stop there, though I couldn't go. I don't have time to move to the micro celebrity and influential media thing. Maybe some other time I can talk about the current, the current status and position of micro celebrity cultures, TikTok, and other kinds of celebrities, and how they forge intimacies with a following, which is very different from what is happening on Facebook and the more intimate kind of expressions of idealized love. Okay, thank you.